Howdy freeze dryers, welcome back to the Live Life Simple Kitchen. We're getting really close to getting our cookbook released, and I noticed that we don't really have a whole lot of breakfast foods, and breakfast is one of those things that everyone likes breakfast. So let's make some French toast today, or at least our freeze-dried version of French toast coming up. I'm using two types of bread today. I just got some French bread, some basic French bread. I also got some Hawaiian bread, which I mentioned in a video a few weeks back. Kind of like the King's brand Hawaiian bread. It's a very sweet bread. I think it'll be awesome for French toast. So let's get into this. We're gonna make some French toast the old-fashioned way, and then we're just gonna freeze dry it, but we're also gonna throw in a couple things here and there that are gonna change the game. So I think we should make some French toast dippers is what I'm gonna call them. And we're gonna cook the French toast, we're gonna dice it up, and then we're gonna make some dipping sauces, but we're gonna leave them in freeze-dried form because I think if this works the way I want it to, we're almost gonna have kind of a cinnamon toast crunch cereal type of thing to dip into some really interesting sauces. It should be really tasty, should be really easy and quick to have a freeze-dried food on the go. So you're gonna wanna get yourself some eggs. And this recipe will vary greatly depending on a lot of things. I'm gonna crack about 6 at a time and then we're gonna scramble them. You're also gonna want something that you can dip the eggs into, or dip the bread into rather, and be able to have room to flip it over and maybe do multiples at a time since we're gonna be doing enough to fill lots of trays. So to our scrambled eggs, 6 eggs, we're gonna add half a teaspoon of nutmeg and then a teaspoon of cinnamon. And normally you would add sugar to French toast, but we don't want to do sugar. I would recommend a substitute. I'm using stevia. I think it works great. And stevia actually is quite a bit sweeter than actual sugar. So you want 2 tablespoons of stevia, or the equivalent of 2 tablespoons of sweetener. And then we want to add a little bit of milk. I would start with probably 1/4 cup of milk, and you can probably go up to 1/2 cup, maybe even a little more. It just depends on really the consistency you want of your mixture. Last, we're going to hit this with 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract before we mix this all together. And the smell that comes off this is pretty awesome. And once I have this mixed, I'm gonna transfer mine into a bigger bowl that gives me enough room to kind of give these a quick dunk. When we cut up our French bread, the key I think to victory, 1, you need a bread knife. 2, I think that we need to cut them thick enough that they don't crumble when they're freeze dried, but thin enough that they actually are not like a concrete cinder block biting into these. So I think I'll try maybe just a few different ways of doing it, and then hopefully when we're done with this, that gives you guys the best possible solution. These are probably about, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch thick. We'll try a tray of those, and then I'll do another tray of some thin ones. And then we're gonna try our Hawaiian bread. I'm gonna try and make these on a very lightly oiled griddle. I think a griddle is probably the best way to go. If you have something that will not stick without oiling, obviously that's gonna be your best bet. So you want a light amount of egg mixture, get just a tad bit of oil on there, coat both sides, and then usually just a couple minutes on each side is plenty. This part can prove to be pretty tricky, and it might take you a couple goes to get it right. It's hard to make something like this without using heavy oil like you're used to keep it from sticking. So I think the name of the game really is just low heat and slow, and just take your time with it. And there are really just so many variations in this recipe, just between even just the bread that you use, or the size of eggs, or just the type of skillet you're using, that there's really no method to the madness here. So just be patient with it. But usually with freeze drying, if it's not totally perfect the way you want it to, even if you freeze dry it, it's gonna get it to the texture and the consistency that we're looking for. What I'm looking for is something that's lightly browned like that. That side looks just about perfect, I think. And then once they are just a little bit crispy on the outside, I like them to be just a little soft. I'm gonna take a chef's knife and I'm gonna cut them into sticks. And what we're trying to do is make something that is gonna be almost like a potato wedge shape that we can dip into some delicious breakfast sauce. And then from there, we're going to place these onto a parchment lined freeze dryer tray. So as a reference, this is 9 pieces of bread. I threw a 10th piece on there to fill up this tray. So for me, 10 pieces of French bread that's about that big, that'll fill up a medium tray. I'm trying to do different sizes, different thicknesses, different cuts to see what works the best, because I don't want it to crumble, but I think that the egg mixture will kind of hold everything together. I know bread is somewhat fragile, and it probably kind of depends on the type of bread you use as well. Now I'm gonna try our Hawaiian bread, because I think this is gonna be absolutely amazing. And I would recommend, if this looks oily to you, I would blot it with a paper towel as much as possible. And the parchment will soak up some of the grease, and it will stick to the parchment and then not keep it into your freeze-dried food. But if there is an excess amount, you're still gonna want to blot that with a paper towel. So this Hawaiian bread is quite a bit more dense than a regular type bread like a French bread. It's also delicious, and it's a little bit sweeter. And the kind I got is from Walmart's bakery. It's not as sweet as the King's Hawaiian is, but I think it has the right texture. It's a lot more dense. I think it's gonna stick together a lot better, and it's gonna give us a nice, sweet, dense French toast stick. Well, I just flipped the Hawaiian bread, and I can already tell it's gonna be a winner. The texture is so much better, and it's just a lot more dense bread. I think it's gonna hold together really well. I can't wait to get this one done. Well, I like the Hawaiian bread so much that I'm not gonna do another loaf of French bread. This is awesome. The texture is so much better. The finished product is lots better. We'll see how that turns out with freeze drying, if that makes a difference. I would imagine that a dense finished product is gonna work out better for what we want it to do. And last, I wanna do a whole piece, and just to see how it turns out freeze dried, and maybe we can bring it back easily so you could just have regular old French toast if you're camping. I do want to make good on our title French toast dippers though, so I'm gonna make some dipping sauce. And really, I think all you need to do that is just some strawberries and mix them up in a blender with some water, get a nice texture. If you need to add a little sugar, I would prefer stevia if you can, just to give this a little more sweetness, maybe a couple tablespoons at a time until you get that right sweetness. But you're looking for about 6 cups of finished product when you're done in the medium, about 8 cups if you have a large. I'm gonna put our dividers in the 40 portion. That way we have individual portions so we can make packets for our finished product. Well, my first one was all strawberries. The second one is bananas, blueberries, raspberries. I threw some stevia in. I'm gonna use some molds in this one just so I can fill up this extra space on the tray. But this is really where you can get super creative, because depending on what kind of fruits or things you want to dip into, there's really almost unlimited options. But what if you want the traditional syrup or peanut butter, something like that? We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the video. I'm going to fill these up, we're going to get them in the freezer and get them frozen, then we're going to freeze dry, and we'll talk about some alternative dipping sauces. So take a minute to subscribe while you have a minute, and make sure that you click the bell that's right next to the subscribe button. That'll send notifications to you every time we release a video. That's Sundays at 8 a.m. for us. All right, we ended up with just over 20 hours. Pretty crazy that's that fast. Everything looks very, very nice. Lots of bright colors, lots of delicious looking food. So I'm gonna get this bagged up in the Avid Armor. Don't forget to get your 10% off if you're gonna buy one of these. And then I'm gonna show you a few tricks that you can do to make this kind of a single serving thing if you were eating this on the run. The first thing I would recommend is take your seal time down quite a bit so you don't smash these French toast bites. If you're not using a sealer, it's not a big deal. And then I can also use one of these handy dandy labels. This will be a download on the new Freeze Drying Cookbook. So the next tip I want to show you is how to make some syrup packets. So you can just take a Mylar, and depending on what size Mylar you're using, just cut it to kind of your desired size, and then use your sealer that came with your harvestright and just seal up one side of it. And then we're gonna take and we're gonna make little pockets just like that. And then you can take those little packets and cut them this way, and then stick a funnel in just like that. Honey in there, you can stick some syrup in there to dip into. You could even throw some PB2 in here and reconstitute like a peanut butter mix to put in there, or a peanut butter paste. And then just throw that in with the rest of your French toast dippers. And this little tip right here can be used in a lot of recipes. I don't utilize it enough, but I really should. So keep it in mind for future recipes. And one last word of warning, when you are doing any kind of fruit really, it rehydrates extremely fast. In fact, this has just been sitting in the refrigerator for not very long, and it's already soft and sponge-like. So be very careful. Strawberries are one of the worst for that. They're just like a sponge. They take any kind of moisture in the air and they just suck it up. Now I'm going to open up our French toast dippers. There is our whole piece. And we're gonna let that sit in the fridge for just a few hours and see if we can bring that back real quick. Here are our French toast dippers and some of our fruit dipping sauce. I'm gonna rehydrate this first. It's not gonna take much to get this back to a sauce, and it's ready. So for the French toast dippers, I know I said I did a bunch of different variations on how I cut them and thicknesses and stuff. The thicker ones definitely did better, but really all of them did pretty well. In fact, the ones that busted, they're still big enough to use as a dipper. And those right there are probably one of my favorite breakfast things that I've ever done. I think that if you let them just kind of chill in that sauce for a little bit, it'll soften them up and make them even better. So of the two breads, the Hawaiian is definitely my favorite. The French bread is good as well. It's just not as good as that Hawaiian. The Hawaiian, just the sweetness and the texture is really, really good. Let's try it with some syrup, or a lot of syrup. Definitely want to drink some water with these. They can get a little dry after you've had a few. That's where this sauce would come in real handy. I want to try and rehydrate this whole French toast because I would like to see if it actually will turn out. So let's do that right now. So into a Ziploc with a wet paper towel to sit it on. I'm gonna seal this up, throw it in the fridge, but I also, just because curiosity gets the best of me sometimes, I wanna do another Ziploc with the rest of these dippers, and I wanna see if syrup will rehydrate these. And then add the rest of this strawberry puree in here. That'll just really absorb into there. We're gonna lock it up here and we'll throw that in the fridge as well and just let that hang out for a little bit. So I've also had some people say that a good rehydration method for breads and certain things that are difficult, such as our enchiladas a few weeks ago, is to actually submerge them completely underwater and until bubbles stop. And once those bubbles stop, it usually means that there's no more water that can come in. I prefer doing things very slow because I like to reintroduce the water slowly so it doesn't make things soggy. But if you've had good success with dunking, submerging them, or any other kind of rehydration, please let us know in the comments section. All right, let's see how this French toast is doing. It's gotta be good, right? It's full of syrup and strawberries. So the full piece of French toast actually feels like it just came off the griddle. It has that little crisp on the outside, but it's tender on the inside. And our sticks that have been marinating in strawberry and syrup kind of almost looks like jelly now. It almost looks like you took French toast and dunked it in jelly. But these actually have a nice crisp to them still, but there's still a little bit of tenderness to them from where the jelly rehydrated them. And they look really, really tasty. How could they not be? They're soaked in syrup and strawberries. Those are really good. And Hawaiian bread French toast. I like that one a lot. Let's put some syrup on this one. I think if you let this sit with syrup on it in freeze-dried form for about 15 or 20 minutes, I think that you would be able to get a perfect French toast again, which is pretty awesome because that's something that you don't think of when you would be camping or bugging out or whatever you're doing. But the texture is really nice. It has that nice crisp on the outside. It's a little bit tender on the inside. And who knew? I mean, syrup-soaked French toast being good. I call it a total victory. In the meantime, this is Retired at 40. Remember to live life simple. Catch you next week.